What kind of contract might Saquon Barkley get? And what are some of the things the New York Giants need to do to ensure that they don't have a drop off in year two of Brian Daboll's era? We discuss all that and more with former NFL Executive of the Year, Jeff Diamond, coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On podcast family, your team every day. My name's Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us and joining me on today's show is Jeff Diamond. Jeff Diamond is a former NFL executive. He was a high-level executive with the Tennessee Titans. He was also with the Minnesota Vikings. He was once the NFL Executive of the Year, and he's currently now with the 33rd team. So the man knows a little bit about the NFL, and I'm very, very happy to have him on the show for the first time, I might add. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Patricia. Happy to be with you.
All right, Jeff, I want to talk New York Giants with you, and I want to start off with this whole theory that I have, and you can tell me if I'm onto something or maybe I'm off here. But last year, the New York Giants, new GM, Joe Schoen, new head coach, Brian Daboll, first time both of them being promoted to the positions they were in. Brian Daboll put together a staff that included some guys he had familiarity with, some guys he didn't have familiarity with, and they were kind of able to catch the league by storm, by surprise, if you will, going on to have a winning record, make the playoffs, despite some concerns about the talent deficiencies that the team had. How unusual is that, or is it just a matter of the Giants benefited from a soft schedule, or they just got lucky?
Well, I don't think they got lucky. You don't get lucky in the NFL, especially early on when teams started to realize that the Giants were for real. And actually the Jets early in the season too, but the Jets didn't quite pan out because of quarterback problems. The Giants did because Daniel Jones emerged under Brian Daboll and had an excellent year, got a great new contract out of the deal. But I do think that certainly the Giants it was unexpected perhaps, especially with the regime change that happened. But it does happen, and it happened. I'm in Minnesota now, and I do a lot of media work with the Vikings, and certainly the Vikings had a similar kind of season last year, winning 13 games until they ran into the Giants in the playoffs, and unfortunately for the Vikings, got beat that day. But I do think that the Giants really had a very good season. And there's plenty of talent on that team. I think it's underrated. I think Daniel Jones is an underrated quarterback. We know Saquon Barkley is a talented running back. Dexter Lawrence was a beast in that playoff game against the Vikings. And so there's plenty of talent on this Giants team, and they're still trying to augment it, which is a good thing because they know they're playing in maybe the toughest division in the NFL, or certainly it's right up there with obviously the Eagles and the Cowboys and the Commanders if they ever figure out their quarterback.
I know it's early, right now everybody's got 90-man rosters and, we don't know exactly what the rosters are going to look like. But one of the Giants' objectives this offseason was to try and close the talent gap in that NFC East, especially with the Cowboys and with the Eagles. How far do you think they've made as far as that progress goes in doing so?
Well, I do. I like their draft pick, first round pick, Deonte Banks, and we saw here in Minnesota he might be a guy the Vikings were looking at strongly. They needed help at corner. They ended up taking Jordan Addison, the wide receiver from USC. But Banks is a quality guy, should step right into the lineup at corner and help the Giants. And we know the kind of talent that they've got at certainly at quarterback with Jones. He still needs to make a few more strides, but he showed that he's a dangerous passer and runner. Barkley, once they figure out his contract situation, we know that he's one of the elite running backs in the NFL. And bringing Darren Waller in, if he can stay healthy, certainly is helpful at the wide receiver spot. I think the tight end spot. And at wide receiver, I think they have a very underrated group. And Hodgins, for example, was a very productive guy, under the radar guy, and there's plenty of other talent, certainly in that receiver room. So I think the Giants are a good team. The toughest thing for them is still looking up at the Eagles and the Cowboys in that NFC East, and it's a very difficult division.
Yeah, it's not bad considering a couple of years ago, the NFC East was not a very good division. And, last year it just kind of really took off. We talked about Daniel Jones here. When you look at his game, where did he take the biggest step forward, do you think?
I just think he became much more efficient in the passing game and as a runner. I think his confidence level grew, and that's such a big part of being a successful quarterback in the NFL. And I just think Brian Daboll did a great job with him as far as emphasizing his strengths as a runner and as a passer. And he is a much more athletic quarterback than a lot of people give him credit for. Very dangerous runner, and over 700 yards rushing, I think, last year. I just think he's a guy he's definitely an ascending talent in the league. And we always talking as a former GM, I was always looking at players. Are they ascending or descending? And Daniel Jones clearly is ascending.
Was he ascending, though, before Daboll got here? Because obviously they went through different coordinators. They went through different coaching staffs, different regimes, different talent. They didn't really have a good offensive line. I mean, you can make any kind of excuse you want. But was the skill set always there, and just a matter of, now they've got stability, now they've got a system that better fits them? I mean, are we just now seeing it, or did it just magically appear because it just happens to fit what the Giants are running?
Well, I think it's a combination. I think it's maturity as a player growing in the NFL, and I think it's the right coaching staff and the right tutelage that he got with Daboll, who had done a great job, obviously, with Josh Allen in Buffalo. And so I just think the timing was right for Daniel Jones. And hey, he was under some pressure last year. We know that going into the last year under contract, and the Giants had not exercised his fifth-year option and all those things that were going on. So he knew he had to produce, and he did. I still think he has even a higher level to get to. He has not been a Pro Bowl quarterback yet. Not that that's the all-ending thing, but I think he's heading in that direction. And I just think that it was overall a combination: new regime, maturity on his part, and a little better talent around the offensive line, a little bit better. And you think of guys like Andrew Thomas coming on, and I just think the whole thing was starting to come together for him.
Do you think the Giants overpaid for him? I know that's a big debate going on, but the market is what the market dictates. And did they overpay for him?
Oh, they probably did a little bit. And it's interesting when he comes in at that $40 million a year deal. I think it opens some eyes, clearly. But then, since then, what has happened? Well, Jalen Hurts gets 51 million a year off of basically one big year. Well, Daniel Jones had one big year, jumped to 40 million a year, but Hurts was the runner-up MVP, took his team to the Super Bowl. So a little bit different dynamics at work. The quarterback market just was so explosive in the past year. I thought that Jones was going to come in closer to 35 million a year. I thought that was the right number, but I think because of his leverage that he was going to be a free agent, or the Giants were going to franchise him, which they preferred not to because they wanted to stick the franchise tag on Barkley. So he was in a perfect position leverage-wise to get that deal, and the Giants kind of had to pony up. And the one thing, you don't want to be cheap with your quarterback, certainly. And so, yeah, he should be very happy with that contract when he really has only had one really good season, and the seasons before were kind of shaky.
Before we move off of Daniel Jones here, where do you think he can take the next step in his development? What does he still need to show people besides obviously becoming maybe a Pro Bowler or, you know, I don't know, hitting a certain milestone, a statistic milestone or whatever?
I just think it's a further evolution of his game as a passer and as a runner, and just being maybe a little more consistent. Um, I think he's accurate enough, but maybe continue to improve that accuracy, which is so important for an elite quarterback, and his playmaking, decision making when things break down. I think that's what separates the great quarterbacks, the Patrick Mahomes, the Joe Burrows, those kind of people in the league, from the good quarterbacks. It's that, what do they do when the play breaks down? And that's where he had, I think, took a big step last year, because he was able to take off and run. Although quarterbacks still have to be careful, and he has to be careful because they can get hurt when they're off running loose. So, and learning how to slide. We saw that with Lamar Jackson, how he's been hurt the last couple of years, and not that it necessarily hurt his new contract either, but but I just think Daniel Jones will continue to evolve, and I like his game.
Hey, Giant fans, get in on all the sports action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if their first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today and claim your no-sweat first bet. FanDuel offers great promotions, a safe and secure app to set your bets, and instant payouts. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NFL. Hey, Giant fans, don't forget to follow me on social media. My Twitter handle is @Patricia_Traina, Traina. And over on Instagram, where my handle is @PattyTraina, PattiTraina. I'll have for you clips, audio clips, practice clips, and so much more from training camp, which gets underway next month. Hope to see you over on social media. All right, let's pivot over to Saquon Barkley, who's the other half, I think, of the big discussion this offseason. Saquon Barkley, people look at him and, as much more than a running back that, without him in the lineup last year, the Giants probably wouldn't have been able to do what they have been able to do. But yet the market just for running backs in general just has gone down the tubes. Let me start off by asking you, why do you think running backs, the value for them has just gone down the tube over the last several years?
Yeah, I think it's the evolution of more predominance of the passing game. And so the running backs that are getting paid, Christian McCaffrey, those kind of guys, are the guys that are dual purpose backs and can be so effective in the passing game too. So McCaffrey is on his $16 million a year deal, and I think he's supposed to make whatever $12 million this coming year in cash. I think Barkley is that kind of back. I think he is a dual purpose back, and I think that's why he will get the money eventually, but he's not going to be paid what wide receivers are making in the league. It's just the way of the world right now, that Justin Jefferson here in Minnesota is going to make over $30 million a year in his new contract as the Vikings get him extended. He's the top receiver in the league, and that's where the emphasis is on wide receivers. Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams are both making $28 to $30 million a year. So, Jefferson's going to get over that, but the top running backs are only making half that money. Is it fair? Is it right? Probably not, because the running backs are still carrying a big load in a lot of ways physically, and taking hits and pass protection and all the different things they have to do in the passing game, the running game. I think Saquon Barkley is a great player. He's also had some injury issues in his career. We know that. And so that's one of the things the Giants are pondering as they look at his extension. And so I think there are only about maybe a couple running backs in the league making more than $10 million a year now, which is crazy, it seems. But it's basically McCaffrey and Derrick Henry in Tennessee, and Saquon on his franchise tag that he hasn't signed is over 10. So it's just a weird dynamic. But how do you explain the top offensive tackles are making $23 million a year. The top pass rushers are making 28 to 31, where Aaron Donald and TJ Watt are. And here's Saquon Barkley, a great Pro Bowl player, can't get that kind of money or close to it. Dalvin Cook was cut here in Minnesota, and he was supposed to make $11 million this year, and they deemed that too expensive. He had a $14 million cap hit. And so Dalvin was cut loose, but the Vikings feel that they've got other players that can replace him. Dalvin Cook's production had fallen from year to year to his lowest yards per carry last year. And so he was susceptible with that big cap number. He gets released, and now he's on the open market. We'll see what he gets. I don't think he's going to get $11 million. I think he's going to get probably something closer to what Miles Sanders got when he left Philadelphia as a Pro Bowl back, and he signs for a little over $6 million a year in Carolina. And Miles Sanders helped lead the Eagles to the Super Bowl, but they feel they've got other guys that can replace him, Gainwell and other guys. And so it's really tough for running backs these days, especially when a lot of teams use running back by committee. And the teams look at Kansas City. Pacheco, a rookie 7th round pick, was their starting running back. They win the Super Bowl, and he was making, I think, minimum salary last year, $700,000 or whatever. And the Eagles go to the Super Bowl. Sanders was making 1.6 last year, and they had the other guys around him. So if a team can go to the Super Bowl, 2 teams go to the Super Bowl paying the running backs like that, unfortunately for Saquon Barkley and the other running backs in the league, it doesn't bode well for them. It's just the way of the market right now.
What do you think, when it's all said and done, if you had to take a guess, and I know APY it could be fudged, with incentives, not likely to be earned, likely to be earned and all that stuff. But where do you see Saquon maybe landing when it's all said and done with regards to a contract?
I could see him in that $11-12 million a year range, but with active roster bonuses to max it out so that he's on the field because of his injury history. So I could see the Giants doing that because of his multi-purpose versatility as a player, and he's so critical to the Giants offense. We know that, and without him, I just think they're just not the same team offensively, and because they don't necessarily have that dynamic number one Jefferson, Hill, Adams type receiver, but they also don't have to pay that guy either, and so they could put some of that money towards Saquon Barkley.
Hey, Giant fans, if you haven't checked out our Subtext community, what are you waiting for? We're offering a free 14-day trial right now in which you can sign up via text and receive customized alerts from me, and also to text one-on-one with me. It's a 14-day trial, and after your 14-day trial is over, with the special promo code PTRAIN, PTRAIN, you can get 2 months for the price of one. That's a limited time offer. Check it out today. There's no obligation. If you don't like the service, cancel before your free 14-day trial period ends. Full details can be found in the show notes. All right, Jeff, let's turn to the Giants in general. I mean, when you look at this team and the moves that Joe Schoen has made, where do you think they have taken the biggest step forward in terms of being more competitive?
I think offensively they've taken a step up, and I think that's been the biggest change. And the defense, they've got some pretty good players, but they could still certainly upgrade the talent. They've tried to do that with guys like Banks and some of their free agent signings. But I just think overall the team is a solid team and a playoff caliber team. It's just, as we said, playing in the NFC East is a big challenge. And so can you win enough games when you're facing the Eagles twice, the Cowboys twice? It's tougher than some of the other divisions in the league, the NFC South, for example. You'd much rather be facing Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Carolina, Atlanta than what the Giants have in the NFC East. So it's tough sledding, but that's the hand they're dealt, and they understand that.
They didn't get a number one receiver. Do you think they can still be, competitive, like really competitive, despite not having a true number one receiver? And I know Waller's probably going to be the de facto number one receiver, but they don't have a Justin Jefferson. So can they still be effective, do you think, despite not having that number one guy?
Yeah, I think they can. As I said, I think Hodgins did a lot of stuff last year, kind of under the radar, a lot of big plays. We know Slayton's got talent. I think that Jalen Hyatt was a good draft pick, extremely productive at Tennessee, and he can run. We know that, so he can be a guy that could be a difference maker, perhaps in the deep passing game. So I think there are a lot of things that they've done to help. And as you said, Waller is a guy who's going to get a lot of targets, but can he stay healthy? That's the big question with Darren Waller. So I think the Giants are okay at receiver, but if these guys don't produce this year, I think there's a good shot that they could be looking maybe in the first round next year for a wide receiver.
And then on the defensive side of the ball, we talk about the devaluation of running backs. We've also kind of seen it a little bit with inside linebackers, I think, certainly with the Giants, I can't remember the last time they really had a legitimate studded inside linebacker. I mean, has that position devalued over the years or, and why?
Yeah, I guess Carl Banks, right?
And that's years ago.
Sure is.
Or Jesse Armstead, you can maybe consider him too, but
yeah,
exactly. Or no, Antonio Pierce, if we're going recent.
Right, sure. I think that, I think the inside linebacker spot is another place that has devalued, and even the tight ends are not getting paid what nearly what the wide receivers are. So there are certain positions in the league that are more highly compensated. If you're a great offensive tackle, you're going to get paid. If you're a good guard, probably less. If you're a center, less. It's just the way it is. And yeah, defensively, the linebacker position, it's the outside linebacker, it's the edge rushing linebacker who's getting paid, the TJ Watts of the world. And so that's just the way it is in the NFL these days. Who's making the impact and who do teams value the most? And so it's not necessarily inside linebackers.
If the Giants want to avoid a sophomore slump, because, again, last year, everything was brand new. There wasn't a lot of tape, there was some guesswork, based on the work that Daboll did up in Buffalo, but different personnel and everything like that. Now the league has had a year to look at the tape on them, but how can the Giants, do you think, avoid a sophomore slump under this coaching staff?
Yeah, I think it's going to start with Daniel Jones continuing to progress. I think it's going to continue with the team improving in all facets and just not resting on the laurels of one playoff win and sliding into the playoffs as a wild card team. I think they'd have to have greater aspirations, and I think they do. I think that Daboll is a guy that that had a lot of success in Buffalo, and he expects that in New York, and so does Shane. So I just think that the arrow's pointing up on the Giants. But again, we circle back to, you still got to play the Eagles and Cowboys twice. You still got to navigate that NFC East. But the NFC as a whole, it's not that daunting compared to the AFC and some of those top teams. And so I think the Giants have a really good shot to be a playoff team again. I don't necessarily see them winning the NFC East, however.
Yeah, maybe another wild card. But do you think double-digit wins is a realistic goal?
Yeah, I think that certainly 10 wins, 10, 11 wins is something they could shoot for. But again, playing in that division may be tough. I would say 10 is certainly a very reasonable, makeable type goal for the Giants. I'm sure they're thinking higher than that, but it's just going to be tough.
And of course, the other thing with the Giants is they've got to stay healthy, which has been a problem for them for whatever the reason. I mean, they play on the same turf as the Jets, and the Jets have been able to stay healthier. Now they replaced the turf there, so we'll see if that has anything to, if that has an effect on it. But the Giants just absolutely cursed when it comes to the injury bug.
Yeah, they had certainly had injury problems in the secondary last year. We know, and we know Barkley has in the past, and so that's going to be a big challenge for them. But I think some of the good things that they can look at is, for example, Thibodeau going into his second year, he made some really good strides toward the end of the season last year. I think he's an impact guy that will get better. Oftentimes, as a GM, I saw the greatest improvement in our players from year one to year two, because rookies, it takes a while for them to get acclimated, to feel comfortable, learning a new system, learning a new city, all those type of things. And now it's year two. And so I think Kayvon could be a guy that could be a much more impactful player this year.
Well, fingers crossed that the Giants have a continued upward trend. We don't want to see them sliding backwards. And it would also be nice if maybe they played a lot of tight games last year. So maybe they can, I don't know, win a few games by 2 or more scores as opposed to these 7 or less point games that they managed to eke out.
Yeah, that's a tough ask in the NFL, because there's just teams are so even, and it's a fine line between winning and losing. And we saw that here with the Vikings last year. They had 11 one-score wins, 11-0 in one-score games. Then they get to the playoffs against the Giants. That was the only one-score game they lost.
Yeah, those are tough for sure.
Right.
Jeff, really appreciate you coming on with me. He is Jeff Diamond, former NFL Executive of the Year, former high-level executive with the Tennessee Titans, the Minnesota Vikings. He's now with the 33rd team. Make sure you check out his work over there, as well as everybody's work over at the 33rd team. They do a really good job giving you a perspective from inside the league. These are folks that have been either scouts or GMs or personnel guys or whatever, coaches. They've got a nice wide range. So do check them out, folks. That's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. We will see you again tomorrow, Giant fans.